5 years. That's how long it takes for a kingdom to forget your name and a woman to learn how to hate you. They say the Alpha King abandoned his throne for power. They're wrong. Kael Draven didn't leave to conquer. He left because Stain would have gotten her killed. Now he's back, wearing a dead man's name, watching the only woman he ever loved promise herself to another Alpha. And she has no idea the stranger who just saved her brother's life is the same king who shattered her world. If you want to see how far a man will fall to earn back what fear made him destroy, you better stick around till the end. Hit that like button and drop your city in the comments. Let me know where my pack is watching from tonight. The rain came down like broken glass on the northern border, and Kael Draven stood in it like a man who'd forgotten what shelter felt like. He'd been standing there for 3 hours, watching, waiting. The kind of waiting that carved holes in your chest and filled them with things you couldn't name. Across the valley, through the storm and the dark, he could see the lights of Thornwick Settlement. Small, weak. The kind of place powerful alphas didn't bother protecting anymore. The kind of place Celine Arden had retreated to after he disappeared. Kael's hands were shaking, not from the cold. He'd stopped feeling cold the night he walked away from the Shadowfang throne room and left his entire life burning behind him. No, this was something else, something that lived in the space between his ribs and whispered her name every time his heart beat. He pulled the hood of his cloak lower, hiding the scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw, a gift from the betrayal that nearly ended him. The scar was new. The name he traveled under was borrowed from a dead warrior. Riker Vale. Nobody important, nobody dangerous, nobody who could hurt her again. The wolfsbane on his belt burned against his hip, a reminder that he wasn't here as a king. Kings commanded armies. Kings made declarations. Kings stood in marble halls and pretended their decisions didn't cost them everything. Riker Vale just needed to see if she was still breathing. A branch snapped behind him. Kael's hand went to the blade at his spine before his brain caught up. Instinct, the kind you didn't lose even when you gave up a crown. He turned slow, letting whoever it was see his hands, see he wasn't running. 3 wolves melted out of the tree line. Rogues, from the smell of them. Unbonded. Feral. Their eyes caught the moonlight wrong, too bright, too hungry. The kind of wolves that forgot what pack law meant and remembered only the taste of blood. The center one, a female with a torn ear, tilted her head at Kael like she was deciding which part of him to eat first. He didn't move. She growled low, testing him. When he still didn't flinch, she shifted, bones cracking, skin reforming, until a woman stood there instead, naked, scarred, grinning with too many teeth. "You lost, stranger?" Her voice scraped out like rust on metal. Kael kept his face empty. "Just passing through Thornwick territory." She laughed, and the 2 males behind her shifted too, flanking him without bothering to hide it. "That's Arden land now. Little pack, weak alpha. You pay the toll or you feed the crows. Your choice." He'd killed rogues before, killed them in numbers that would have made these 3 piss themselves if they knew. But Riker Vale wasn't supposed to be dangerous. Riker Vale was supposed to be forgettable. So Kael reached for the coin pouch at his belt, slow and deliberate, like a man who knew better than to make sudden moves. The female's grin widened. "Smart boy." That's when the scream cut through the rain. High, young, desperate. All 3 rogues turned toward the sound, and Kael saw it in their eyes. Hunger. The kind that didn't care about coin when fresh prey was running scared. The female shifted back mid-laugh, already running toward Thornwick, and her pack followed. Kael stood there for exactly 2 seconds, weighing the cost of what came next. Then he ran after them, faster than any wandering nobody should have been able to move. The boy couldn't have been more than 16. Kael saw him stumbling through the mud near the settlement's edge, one leg dragging, blood mixing with the rain. Behind him, the 3 rogues closed in like wolves who'd already tasted the kill. The kid turned, backing against a stone wall, and pulled a knife that shook so hard in his grip it might as well have been made of wind. "Stay back!" His voice cracked on the words. "I'm warning you!" The rogues laughed. Kael hit the first male before any of them registered he was there. Drove his shoulder into the wolf's ribs, hard enough to hear bones snap. Used the momentum to spin and drag his blade across the second male's throat before the body even hit the ground. Blood sprayed hot across his face. The female whirled, snarling, and lunged for him with claws extended. He sidestepped, caught her wrist, and broke it in 3 places. She screamed and shifted back to human, cradling her ruined arm, staring at him like she'd just seen something impossible. Cale didn't give her time to figure it out. He kicked her hard enough to send her sprawling into the mud, then turned to the boy still frozen against the wall. "You hurt?" The kid's eyes were wide, locked on the 2 dead wolves bleeding out in the rain. He didn't answer. Cale grabbed his shoulder, not gentle. I said, "Are you hurt?" The boy blinked, finally focusing. "My leg. They came out of nowhere. I was just checking the traps and—" "Save it." Cale hauled him upright, ignoring the kid's wince. "Where's your alpha?" "My sister, Celine. She's at the healer's hall, but you can't just—" "Watch me." He dragged the boy toward the settlement lights, leaving the female rogue groaning in the mud behind them. She'd live. She'd spread the word that something dangerous was moving through Arden territory. That was fine. Better they thought Riker Vale was a killer than recognize the king who used to sign execution orders with his family's seal. The boy stumbled, trying to keep up. "Who are you?" "Nobody." Cale kept his voice flat. "Just passing through." "You just killed 2 rogues like it was nothing. That's not nobody." "Then I'm somebody who doesn't want to answer questions." "Move faster." They reached the main path leading into Thornwick, and Kyle felt it hit him like a fist to the chest. Her scent, faint, layered under wood smoke and wet earth and the iron tang of healing herbs. But there, real, alive. He'd gone 5 years without breathing it, and now his lungs were remembering how to work again. The boy was staring at him. "You okay?" "Fine." Cale forced himself to keep walking. "The healer's hall." "How far?" "Just ahead." "But listen, my sister she doesn't trust outsiders. Especially not alphas. If you come in there smelling like blood and power, she'll what?" The boy's jaw tightened. "She'll make you leave." Cale almost smiled. Almost. Let her try. The healer's hall was smaller than he remembered, or maybe he'd just gotten used to seeing everything through the lens of a kingdom, back when he had one. Inside, the air was thick with sage and steam. Wounded pack members lay on cots along the walls, some sleeping, some groaning through pain they didn't have the strength to hide. An older woman moved between them with bowls of something that smelled like death and mercy mixed together. And there in the back near the fire, standing over a man with a shattered arm, was Celine. Cale's heart stopped. She looked different, thinner, harder. Her dark hair was pulled back in a braid that had come half undone, and there were shadows under her eyes that hadn't been there before. But her hands were steady as she set the bone. And when the man screamed, she didn't flinch. "Hold him." Her voice cut through the room like a blade through silk. "If he moves, this doesn't set right." 2 pack members pinned the man's shoulders while Celine worked, her focus absolute. Cale watched her the way a drowning man watches the surface, and for a moment he forgot how to be anybody but the king who'd loved her. Then the boy beside him shouted, "Celine!" She looked up. Her eyes found Kael's across the room, and the world went silent. He saw the exact moment she registered him. Saw her spine straighten, her shoulders pull back, the healer's mask sliding over her face like armor. She didn't recognize him. How could she? He'd carved scars into his own face to make sure of it, changed his scent with wolfsbane and ash, buried everything that used to matter under a dead man's name. But her instincts knew. He could see it in the way her hand drifted toward the knife on her belt, the way her nostrils flared, testing the air, the way her wolf rose just beneath her skin, growling warnings he couldn't hear but could feel. What happened? She left the patient, crossing the hall toward them, and Kael had to remind himself to breathe. "Finian, why are you bleeding?" The boy, Finian, gestured at Kael like he was presenting evidence. "Rogues jumped me near the eastern border, 3 of them. He killed 2 and broke the 3rd one like she was made of sticks." Celine's gaze snapped back to Kael, colder now. "That true?" Kael met her eyes and lied. "I was in the area." "In the area." She repeated it like she was tasting poison. "On Arden land. In the rain. Just in time to save my brother from rogues that haven't been seen this far south in months." He kept his voice level. Lucky timing. Her hand was definitely on her knife now. I don't believe in luck. Who sent you? Nobody. Try again. Kale could have told her the truth, could have dropped the act right there and watched her world shatter a second time. Instead, he tilted his head toward Finian, still bleeding and shaking beside him. Your brother needs stitches. We doing this now, or you want to fix him first? Celine's jaw clenched hard enough he heard her teeth grind. Then she turned to the older woman hovering near the fire. Mira, take Finian, clean the wound and sew it shut. She looked back at Kael, and her wolf was right there in her eyes now, golden and furious. You. Outside. Now. The rain had softened to a drizzle, but the cold hadn't let up. Celine stood 3 feet away from him in the mud outside the hall, arms crossed, radiating the kind of anger that came from years of practice. Behind her, through the doorway, Kael could see Finian arguing with Mira, trying to follow them out. Talk. Celine's voice was flat, fast. Before I decide saving my brother doesn't buy you enough mercy to walk away breathing. Kael studied her. The scars on her knuckles, the burn mark on her left forearm, faded but still visible. The way she held herself like she expected the next blow to come from anywhere. What do you want to know? Start with your name. Riker. Riker Vale. Where are you from? North, past the Blackwater Range. Doing what? Surviving. Her eyes narrowed. You move like a soldier. Fight like one too, from what Finian said. So who trained you? Kael almost told her. Almost said, you did, the night you showed me how to block a knife strike without losing my throat. Instead, he shrugged. I've been in fights. That's not an answer. It's the one you're getting. Celine took a step closer, and Kael's entire body locked up. She was close enough now he could see the silver flecks in her eyes, the ones that used to catch firelight when she laughed. She wasn't laughing now. I don't trust warriors who appear out of nowhere and kill with surgical precision. Her voice dropped lower, deadly quiet. I don't trust men who smell like wolfsbane and lies. And I sure as hell don't trust strangers who look at me like they know something I don't. Kael forced himself to hold her gaze. Maybe I'm just good at my job. Which is? Staying alive. By killing rogues in other people's territory, by being in the right place at the wrong time. Celine stared at him for a long moment, searching his face for something she wouldn't find. Then she stepped back, and the distance felt like a canyon opening up between them. You're dangerous. I can smell it on you, under the wolfsbane, under whatever mask you're wearing. You've got alpha blood, or something close to it. Kael didn't blink. I'm nobody's alpha. Then what are you? He let the silence stretch, watching her wrestle with instincts that screamed warning she couldn't name. Finally he said, just a man trying to forget who he used to be. Something flickered in her expression. Not recognition, not trust, but maybe understanding. She looked away toward the settlement, toward the fragile lights of a pack barely holding on. When she spoke again, her voice had lost its edge. We don't have much here. Can't pay you for what you did. I don't want payment. Everyone wants something. Kael's throat tightened. Not this time. Celine turned back to him, and for just a second he saw the woman she used to be. The one who'd believed in him when no one else did. The one who'd stood beside a ruthless king and whispered that mercy wasn't weakness. That woman was gone. He'd killed her himself when he walked away. You can stay. Her words came out grudging, like she was making a mistake and knew it. One night, Finian owes you that much. But tomorrow, you're gone. Understand? Kael nodded, not trusting his voice. She started to walk back inside, then paused. And Riker? He waited. If I find out you lied to me about why you're really here, I'll put you in the ground myself. We clear? Crystal. She disappeared into the hall, leaving him standing in the rain with the weight of 5 years pressing down on his chest like a stone. Kael looked up at the sky, at the clouds rolling past the moon, and wondered how long a man could keep breathing when every breath was a lie. They gave him a corner near the fire. Not a room, not a bed, just a patch of floor and a blanket that smelled like smoke and old blood. Finian hovered nearby, stitched and bandaged, trying to make conversation while Celine worked on the other side of the hall, pretending Kael didn't exist. You really just passing through? Finian asked for the third time. Kael stared at the fire. Yeah. Where are you headed? Nowhere specific. That's a terrible plan. It's working so far. Finian laughed, then winced when it pulled his stitches. You're weird, you know that? Kael almost smiled. I've been told. Across the hall, Celine barked orders at Mira, her tone sharp enough to cut. She was stressed, exhausted, running on fumes and sheer willpower, the way she used to when she'd sit up all night in the palace infirmary, stitching soldiers back together while Kael watched from the doorway and wondered how someone so soft could be so unyielding. She caught him looking. Their eyes met across the fire, and for a heartbeat, the noise of the hall faded. It was just them, just this, the girl he'd loved, and the ghost wearing a stranger's name. Then she looked away, and the moment shattered. Finian was still talking. My sister's tough, but she's fair. If you're really just passing through, she'll let you go without trouble. But if you're lying, I'm not. The boy studied him, too observant for 16. You sure? Because you look at her like you've seen her before. Kael's jaw tightened. I look at everyone the same. No, you don't. Finian leaned closer, lowering his voice. You look at her like she's the only thing in the room. And trust me, that's a bad idea. She's engaged. The words hit Kael like a blade between the ribs. He knew. He'd heard of the rumors even in the north. Celine Arden promised to Marcus Hale, alpha of the Stoneclaw pack. A political match. A survival strategy. The kind of alliance weak packs made when they couldn't afford to stand alone. But hearing it from Finian made it real in a way that rumors couldn't. Engaged. Kael kept his voice flat. Good for her. Finian snorted. You don't sound like you mean that. I don't care who she marries. Liar. Kael turned to look at the kid, really look at him, and saw Celine's eyes staring back. Sharp. Relentless. The kind of eyes that saw through walls. You're her brother. That makes you loyal. I respect that. But don't push. Finian held his gaze for a moment, then shrugged. Fair enough? Just don't break her heart. She's had enough of that. Kael didn't answer. Couldn't answer. Because the truth was rotting in his chest like a wound that wouldn't close. And if he opened his mouth, it would spill out and drown them both. Midnight came, and the hall finally quieted. Most of the wounded were sleeping. Mira had gone to her own quarters. Finian had passed out near the fire, snoring soft and even. Only Celine remained awake, sitting at a table near the back, writing something by candlelight. Kael watched her from his corner, hidden in shadow. She looked so tired, so alone, and he hated it, hated that he'd done this to her, hated that 5 years ago he'd stood in a throne room and listened to his counsel tell him that loving Celine Arden would get her killed, that enemies inside the court were already plotting to use her against him, that the only way to save her was to let her go. So he'd let her go. Walked away without explanation. Let her think he'd chosen power over her. Let her hate him, because hate would keep her alive when love would have made her a target. And now she was here. Still breathing. Still fighting. Still everything he didn't deserve. Celine looked up suddenly, straight at him, like she'd felt his gaze. Can't sleep? Her voice carried across the quiet hall. Kael stood, moving into the candlelight. Not used to floors this comfortable. She raised an eyebrow. That's the saddest thing I've heard all week. He almost smiled. What are you writing? Supply lists, injury reports, letters to alphas who won't answer. She set down her pen, rubbing her eyes. The usual. Kael moved closer, careful to keep distance between them. Your pack's struggling. It wasn't a question. Celine's expression hardened. We're surviving. Barely. She stood abruptly, chair scraping against stone. You've been here 6 hours and you think you know us? I know what a pack on the edge looks like. Kael kept his tone even. Rogues testing your borders. Wounded fighters who can't afford real healers. An alpha. Writing letters nobody reads. Celine's hands curled into fists. Get to the point or go back to your corner. Why'd you let me stay? The question hung between them like smoke. Celine stared at him, and Kael saw her wrestling with something. Anger. Suspicion. But underneath something softer, something that looked like exhaustion mixed with desperate hope. Finally she said, because Finian would have been dead if you hadn't shown up, and because we've lost too many people already. She looked away. I can't afford to turn away someone who might be useful. Useful? Kyle tasted the word. That's all I am? That's all anyone is anymore. He took a step closer, testing. What happened to you? Celine's eyes snapped back to his, fierce and bright. What happened? She laughed, but there was no humor in it. A king abandoned his throne 5 years ago and left the entire region in chaos. Pacts fractured, alliances collapsed, rogues multiplied because nobody was enforcing territory law anymore. That's what happened. Kael's chest felt like it was caving in. And you ended up here. I ended up trying to hold together a pack that nobody else wanted, trying to protect people who'd been forgotten by everyone who mattered. Her voice cracked, just slightly. So yeah, stranger. That's what happened to me. He wanted to tell her, wanted to drop to his knees and confess every lie, every sacrifice, every sleepless night he'd spent wondering if she was still alive. But the words stuck in his throat, choking him. Instead, he said, "The king who left. You knew him?" Celine went still. For a long moment, she didn't answer. Then quietly, "I thought I did. What happened?" She looked at him, really looked at him, and Kael felt his carefully constructed mask start to crack. He destroyed everything I believed in. Her words came out soft, lethal, made me think I mattered, made me think we were building something real. Then he disappeared without a word, and I realized I was just another piece on his board. Kael's hands were shaking. He hid them behind his back. "Did you love him?" Celine's expression shuddered. "That's not your business. I'm asking anyway." She turned away, shoulders rigid. "It doesn't matter. He's gone. And I learned my lesson. Which is, don't trust alphas, don't trust power, don't trust men who make you believe you're anything more than useful." Kael felt something break inside him, something vital. What if he had a reason? Celine spun back, eyes blazing. There is no reason good enough to abandon the people who needed you. No excuse strong enough to justify that kind of cowardice. What if staying would have gotten you killed? The words fell out before he could stop them. Celine froze. "What did you just say?" Kael's heart hammered against his ribs. Hypothetically. What if he left because enemies were coming for you? What if the only way to keep you safe was to make you hate him? Then he should have told me. Her voice shook. He should have given me the choice instead of deciding I was too weak to handle the truth. Maybe he thought, no. She cut him off, stepping close enough he could see tears she refused to let fall. "You don't get to defend him. You didn't know him. You don't know what he stole when he left." Kael looked at her, at the woman he'd destroyed trying to save, and felt the weight of 5 years crushing him into dust. "You're right." His voice came out hoarse. "I don't know anything." Celine held his gaze for one more second, then turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows at the back of the hall. Kael stood there alone, listening to the fire crackle and Finian snore and his own heart break in slow motion. He'd come here to see if she was alive. Now he knew. And it was so much worse than he'd imagined. Get. Dawn came cold and gray. Kael woke to voices arguing outside the hall. He moved to the window, staying in shadow, and saw Celine standing in the mud facing 3 men on horseback. The center rider was broad-shouldered and smug, wearing the crest of Stoneclaw Pack on his chest. Marcus Hale. The Alpha Selene was supposed to marry. Kael's wolf snarled inside his chest, clawing for release. "You're late, Marcus." Celine's voice carried sharp and clear. "The supplies were supposed to arrive 3 days ago." Marcus dismounted, moving too close, too familiar. "We ran into complications." "What kind?" "The kind that costs extra." Celine's spine went rigid. "We had a deal. Deals change, sweetheart." Marcus reached out to touch her face, and Kael's vision went red. "Especially when I'm taking on a pack this week. You want my protection, you pay the price. We're paying everything we have. Then find more." Marcus's smile turned cruel. "Or maybe we renegotiate the terms of our engagement. I'm sure we can work something out." His hand dropped to her waist, possessive and threatening. Kael was moving before his brain caught up. He crossed the distance in seconds, stepping between Celine and Marcus with enough force to make the Alpha stumble back. She said no. Marcus's eyes went wide, then narrowed. "Who the hell are you?" Kael didn't blink. "Someone who doesn't like the way you're touching her." The 2 men behind Marcus dismounted, hands going to their weapons. Marcus's smile turned dangerous. You've got balls, stranger. I'll give you that. He looked past Kael at Celine. This your new bodyguard? Celine grabbed Kael's arm, trying to pull him back. Riker, don't. But Kael was done pretending. Done watching men like Marcus take things they hadn't earned. Done standing by while the woman he loved got backed into corners by alphas who thought power meant permission. He met Marcus's eyes and let just enough of his real wolf show through, the kind of dominance that didn't need words. Marcus went pale. You don't want this fight? Kael's voice dropped to something cold and final. Walk away. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Marcus stepped back and Kael saw it. Recognition. Not of his face, but of the power radiating off him like heat from a forge. The kind of alpha presence that made other wolves' instincts scream warnings. We'll finish this later. Marcus swung back onto his horse, jerking the reins hard. And Celine? You better teach your dog some manners before I put him down. He rode off with his men, leaving hoof prints in the mud and tension thick enough to choke on. Celine rounded on Kael, furious. What the hell was that? Kael forced himself to breathe, to pull his wolf back, to remember he was supposed to be nobody dangerous. He was touching you. So? That gives you the right to... Yes. The word came out raw, absolute. Celine stared at him, and Kael saw the exact moment she registered what he'd just admitted. Saw her eyes widen, her breath catch, her entire body go still. Who are you? She whispered it like a prayer or a curse. Really? Who are you? Kael opened his mouth to answer, and then the screaming started. From the eastern border, high and desperate and multiplying fast. Finian burst out of the hall behind them, limping but armed. Rogues! He shouted. Dozens of them! Celine's face drained of color. She turned to Kael, and he saw the question in her eyes. Stay or run? Save them or save yourself? Choose. Kael pulled the blade from his spine, felt his wolf rise to the surface, and made the only choice he'd ever been able to make when it came to her. Get your fighters! His voice came out edged in alpha command, and he didn't bother hiding it anymore. I'll hold the line. Celine didn't move. You'll die. Probably. Then why? Because. Kael met her eyes one last time, knowing this might be the moment everything fell apart. Because some things are worth dying for. He ran toward the screaming before she could respond, before he could see the realization dawn in her eyes, before the kingdom he'd abandoned came crashing down on both of them like Judgment Day. Behind him, Celine shouted his name. But he was already gone. The eastern border was chaos painted in blood and moonlight. Kael hit the first rogue at full speed, his blade opening the wolf's throat before it could register the threat. Two more came at him from the left, teeth bared, eyes feral with hunger that had nothing to do with food and everything to do with the kind of madness that came from living outside pack law too long. He ducked under snapping jaws, drove his elbow into one wolf's skull hard enough to hear bone crack, spun, and caught the second with a kick that sent it sprawling into the mud. His wolf was screaming inside him, demanding release, demanding he shift and tear through these rogues the way an alpha king was built to do. But shifting meant losing control of his scent, meant every wolf within a mile would know exactly who he was. So Kael fought as a man, blade and fists in brutal efficiency, while around him Thornwick burned. A woman screamed his left. He turned and saw a rogue dragging her toward the tree line by her hair. Kael threw his knife. It buried itself in the rogue's eye socket, and the wolf dropped like a stone. The woman scrambled away, sobbing, and Kael was already moving toward the next threat. There were too many. 20, maybe 30 rogues flooding through gaps in the settlement's pathetic excuse for defenses. Behind him, he could hear Celine shouting orders, rallying her fighters, but her pack was small, and half of them were already wounded from previous attacks. They were going to lose. Kael grabbed a rogue mid-lunge, twisted its neck until vertebrae popped, and threw the body aside. His hands were slick with blood. His lungs burned. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a voice that sounded like the king he used to be whispered that this was suicide, that one man couldn't hold a border against this many enemies, that strategic retreat was the only rational choice. He told that voice to shut the hell up. A massive gray wolf, bigger than the others, emerged from the darkness. Alpha Rogue. Had to be. Its eyes locked on Kyle with intelligence that made his spine go cold. This wasn't just hunger. This was a hunt. The gray wolf circled him, testing, while smaller rogues hung back like they were waiting for a signal. Kale shifted his stance, empty-handed now, blade lost somewhere in the mud and bodies. His wolf clawed at his control, begging to be let loose. Not yet. The gray wolf lunged. Kyle met it head-on, catching jaws aimed at his throat with his forearm, ignoring the teeth that tore through leather and skin. He drove his free hand into the wolf's ribs, felt something give, used the momentum to throw the creature over his hip. It landed hard but recovered fast, circling again, blood dripping from its mouth. His blood. The wolf charged a second time, and Kyle knew he was out of options. Knew that fighting as a man against an alpha rogue was a death sentence. Knew that the next attack would be the one that put him down. So he did the only thing he could. He let his wolf show through. Not a full shift, just enough. Just a flash of the dominance that came from bloodlines older than most packs could trace, from a throne built on conquest, and the kind of power that made other alphas kneel. The gray wolf froze mid-stride. Every rogue in the clearing went still, and Kyle felt it happen, felt his carefully constructed mask crack wide open, felt the weight of his real presence slam into every wolf within range like a physical blow. The gray wolf's ears flattened. It whined, high and desperate, and then it ran. Bolted into the trees like hell itself was chasing it, and the smaller rogues scattered after it, abandoning their prey, abandoning the fight, running from something their instincts recognized, even if their conscious minds didn't. Alpha King. Kyle stood in the clearing, breathing hard, covered in blood and mud, and felt the silence crash down around him like a burial shroud. Behind him, Celine's voice cut through the quiet. What the hell was that? He turned slowly. She was standing 20 feet away, sword in hand, staring at him like he'd just torn a hole in reality. Around her, what remained of her fighters stood frozen, eyes wide, wolves retreating beneath their skin. They'd all felt it. The pulse of dominance that shouldn't have come from a wandering nobody. Kyle opened his mouth to lie, to deflect, to say anything that would keep his identity buried for just a little longer. But Finian spoke first. The kid was limping toward them from the settlement, face pale, holding something in his hands. Something that made Kyle's chest go cold. A blade. His blade. The one he'd thrown to save the woman. The one he'd commissioned 5 years ago with the Shadowfang seal hidden in the pommel. Invisible unless you knew where to look. Finian was looking. Found this in a dead rogue's skull. The boy's voice shook. Nice knife, custom work, expensive. He turned it over, fingers tracing the pommel, and Kyle watched his face change as he found the seal. Really expensive. Finian looked up, and his eyes weren't a kid's eyes anymore. This is royal metalwork, Shadowfang design, the kind only one person would carry. Celine's sword dropped an inch. What are you talking about? Finian walked forward, holding the blade like evidence, like a weapon, like proof of something that was about to detonate. I'm talking about the fact that our helpful stranger is carrying a knife that belongs to the missing Alpha King. The words hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Celine's face went white. That's impossible. Is it? Finian's voice climbed higher. Because I've been trying to figure out why he fights like royal guard, why rogues run from him like he's death incarnate, why he looks at you like you're the only thing keeping him breathing. Stop. Celine's command cracked like a whip. But Finian didn't stop. He was on a roll now, puzzle pieces clicking together in his head, and Kyle could see the exact moment the boy figured it out. The scars are new, the name's fake. But the eyes. Finian stepped closer, staring at Kyle with something between horror and rage. I've seen paintings in the old capital, portraits they burned after he disappeared. You have his eyes. Celine made a sound like she'd been gutted. Kale didn't move, didn't breathe, just stood there and waited for the world to end. Tell him he's wrong. Celine's voice came out broken. Riker, tell him he's insane. Kyle met her eyes, and he knew she could see the truth in his face before he said a word. Knew she was reading every micro-expression, every flinch, every tell that confirmed what Finian had just accused him of. I can't. 2 words. That's all it took. Celine staggered back like he'd hit her. No. I'm sorry. No. She said it louder, sword coming up, pointing at his chest. You're lying. You're some con artist, some sick bastard trying to... My name is K.L. Draven. His voice came out steady, even though his hands were shaking. I was the Alpha King of Shadowfang, and 5 years ago, I walked away to keep you alive. The silence that followed was the kind that preceded earthquakes. Celine's wolf surged to the surface, eyes going pure gold, and Kael saw murder in them. Raw. Absolute. The kind that came from betrayal so deep it carved out your insides. You. Her voice dropped to something inhuman. You did this to me. Yes. You made me believe I meant nothing. I made you believe a lie to save your life. Celine's laugh was glass-breaking. To save my life. She gestured at the burning settlement, the bodies, the blood. Look around, you bastard. Does this look saved to you? You're breathing. Because I clawed my way through hell, not because you protected me. Her hands were shaking so hard the sword rattled. You want to know what happened after you left? The council fractured. Pacts went to war. Rogues multiplied. And I spent 5 years picking up the pieces of a kingdom you abandoned. There were traitors in the court. Kael's voice stayed level, even though his chest felt like it was caving in. They were planning to kill you, use you against me. The only way to stop them was to make them think you didn't matter. So you decided for me. Yes, without giving me a choice. There was no choice. They would have tortured you, killed everyone you loved, used your screams to control me. His voice cracked. I couldn't let that happen. Celine took a step closer, sword still raised. So you broke my heart instead. I broke mine too. Oh, you want sympathy now? She was shaking with rage. You want me to feel sorry for the king who played dead while his kingdom fell apart? I didn't play dead. I hunted every traitor down. Kael's wolf was rising now, meeting hers. I spent 5 years bleeding in the dark, eliminating threats, making sure that when I came back, you'd be safe. I didn't need you to come back. Yes, you did. He stepped forward, closing distance, matching her fury with his own. Because Marcus Hale is squeezing you dry. Because your pack is dying. Because you're writing letters to alphas who ignore you and rationing food you don't have, and one bad winter away from collapse. Her sword came up against his throat. You don't get to save me. I already did. By lying? By pretending to be someone else? By staying close enough to make sure you survived. His eyes burned. Even if you hated me for it. Celine's blade pressed harder, drawing blood. I should kill you. You should. Why aren't you fighting back? Because I deserve it. Her hands shook. The sword wavered, and Kael saw it in her eyes. The war between what she wanted to do and what she couldn't bring herself to finish. She loved him. Still. Even after everything, even knowing he'd destroyed her. And that was so much worse than hate. Celine lowered the blade slowly, and when she spoke, her voice was empty. Get out. Celine, I said get out. She turned away, shoulders rigid. You wanted me safe. Congratulations, I'm alive. Now leave before I change my mind about letting you stay that way. I'm not leaving you to Marcus. You don't have a say in my life anymore. The hell I don't. She spun back, and the look on her face was pure venom. You lost that right when you walked away. You don't get to show up 5 years later and pretend you still matter. I never stopped mattering. To who? Her voice climbed. To yourself? Because you sure as hell didn't matter to the people you left behind. The soldiers who died waiting for orders. The families who starved when trade collapsed. The packs that tore each other apart because there was no king to enforce the law. Kael's jaw clenched. I know what I cost. Do you? Celine stepped closer, eyes blazing. Do you know that children grew up without fathers because you disappeared? That women buried husbands who died in territory wars you could have stopped? That I held dying wolves in my arms and couldn't answer when they asked where their king had gone? Yes, the word came out hoarse. I know all of it. Then how can you stand there and tell me it was worth it? Because you're alive. The rawness in his voice stopped her cold. Kael looked at her, at the woman he'd destroyed trying to save, and felt every wall he'd built come crashing down. You want the truth? Fine. I was a coward. I was terrified that staying would get you killed, and I couldn't survive that. So I ran. I told myself it was to protect you, but really, I just couldn't handle the thought of failing to keep you safe. His voice broke. And yeah, maybe I made the wrong call. Maybe I should have trusted you to fight beside me. But I didn't. And now I have to live with that. Celine stared at him, breathing hard. That doesn't fix anything. I know. It doesn't change what you did? I know. Then what do you want from me? Cale felt his throat close up. Just a chance to make it right. There is no making this right. Then let me try anyway. Why should I? Because I love you. The words fell out raw and desperate. Because I've loved you since before I wore a crown, and I'll love you long after I'm dust. Because you're the only thing that ever mattered, and I don't care if you hate me as long as you're breathing. Celine's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. You don't get to say that. I just did. After 5 years of silence? After 5 years of hell? Cale took a step closer, and she didn't pull back. Every day I stayed away was a knife in my chest. Every time I heard your name, I wanted to burn the world down just to see you again. Don't tell me I don't get to say it when it's the only true thing I have left. Her breath hitched. You hurt me. I know. You destroyed me. I know. And now you want forgiveness? No. Cale's voice dropped. I want a chance to earn it. Celine looked at him for a long moment, and he saw everything in her eyes. The love, the hate, the desperate hope fighting against brutal pragmatism. Then Finian's shout shattered the moment. Celine, we've got riders coming in fast. They both turned. From the south, torches appeared through the trees. A lot of them. Moving fast. And at the head of the column, Cale could see Marcus Hale's crest gleaming in the firelight. Celine's face went hard. He heard about the attack. Probably thinks he's coming to rescue us. He's coming to leverage your weakness. Cale's voice went cold. Make you more dependent, tighten the leash. I can handle Marcus. Not alone. You can't. I don't need your help. Yes, you do. Cale moved beside her, and his wolf rose to the surface without permission. Because he's not just an alpha looking for a political alliance. He's a predator who sees injured prey. Celine's jaw clenched. What do you suggest? Let me stand beside you. As Riker, as Kyle, I don't care. Just don't face him alone. She looked at him, weighing options she hated. Finally, stay behind me. Don't speak unless I tell you to. And if you do anything to make this worse, I'll finish what I started with that sword. Fair enough. Marcus and his riders thundered into the settlement, horses churning mud, warriors armed for war. The Stoneclaw Alpha dismounted with theatrical concern, striding toward Celine like he owned the ground she stood on. My gods, what happened? His eyes swept the carnage, and Cale saw satisfaction hidden beneath the worry. Are you hurt? We're fine. Celine's voice stayed flat. Rogues hit the eastern border. We handled it. Handled it? Marcus gestured at the bodies, the burning buildings. Celine, your settlement is in ruins. We're standing, aren't we? Barely. He moved closer, too close, and Cale's wolf snarled. This is exactly what I warned you about. Your pack is too weak to defend itself. You need real protection. We have protection. From who? Marcus's gaze landed on Cale, dismissive. Your vagrant bodyguard? Cale kept his mouth shut, but his eyes promised violence. Marcus sneered. I came here to help, and this is the thanks I get? Attitude and defiance? You came here to collect. Celine's voice went sharp. To remind me how much I owe you, how dependent I am, how lucky I should feel that you're willing to marry into this mess. Stoneclaw. Alpha's face darkened. Watch your tone. Or what? Or I walk away and leave you to the next wave of rogues. Then walk. Celine crossed her arms. We'll survive without you. No, you won't. Marcus's smile turned cruel. You're out of supplies, out of fighters, out of options. Without me, you'll be dead by winter. We'll find another way. There is no other way. He stepped closer, and Cale saw his hand move toward Selena's arm. Face it, sweetheart. You need me more than I need you. Cale moved without thinking, putting himself between them again, and this time his dominance wasn't hidden. It rolled off him like heat from a forge, slamming into Marcus and his warriors like a physical blow. The Stoneclaw Alpha stumbled back, eyes going wide. You. Cale didn't blink. She said no. Learn to listen. Marcus's face cycled through shock, recognition, disbelief. His warriors shifted nervously, wolves responding to an alpha presence that made their instincts scream warnings. "It's you." Marcus's voice shook. "The missing king was." Kael kept his tone level. "Now I'm just someone who doesn't like how you talk to her. You disappeared, abandoned the throne. I had my reasons, and now you're what? Plain protector?" Marcus's shock was turning to rage. "You think you can just show up and undo 5 years? I'm not trying to undo anything." Kael stepped forward, and Marcus retreated. "I'm just making sure she has a choice. She already made her choice. We're engaged, under duress." When she thought she had no other options, Kael's wolf pressed against Marcus's, dominance against dominance, and there was no contest. "That ends now. You can't just—" "I can." Kael let his eyes shift, let gold bleed through. "And I am." Marcus stared at him, and Kael could see the calculations happening, could see the Stoneclaw Alpha weighing his options. Fighting a returned Alpha King was suicide, but backing down meant losing face, losing leverage, losing Celine. Finally, Marcus turned to Celine. "You're really going to let him do this after he abandoned you?" Celine's expression was unreadable. "I haven't decided what I'm letting anyone do. But you should leave before this gets uglier. We had a deal. The deal's on hold." "Celine." "Go, Marcus." Her voice hardened. "Before I let Kael remove you himself." The Stoneclaw. Alpha's jaw worked. Then, quietly, "You're making a mistake." "Maybe. But it's my mistake to make." Marcus stared at her for a long moment, then swung back onto his horse. "We'll talk when you come to your senses." He rode off with his warriors, leaving tension thick enough to choke on. Celine waited until the hoofbeats faded, then turned to Kael. "That was stupid." "Probably. He'll come back with an army." "Let him. You just declared war on Stoneclaw Pack." "No." Kael met her eyes. "I just made it clear you have options. I don't want options from you. Too bad. You have them anyway." Celine's hands curled into fists. "You can't just storm back into my life and start making decisions." "I'm not making decisions. I'm standing beside you while you make them. That's the same thing." "No, it's not." Kael's voice softened. 5 years ago, I took your choice away. I'm not doing that again. You want me gone? Say the word. You want to marry Marcus? I'll walk away. But if you want to fight, if you want to rebuild this pack on your terms instead of his, then I'm here. Why? Because it's what I should have done the first time. Celine looked at him, and he saw her wrestling with something, then quietly, I don't trust you. I know. I don't forgive you. I know that too. And I'm not falling for this again. I'm not asking you to fall. Kael held her gaze. I'm just asking you to let me stand beside you while you figure out what comes next. She was quiet for a long time. Around them, the settlement was picking up pieces, tending wounds, counting losses. Finian watched from a distance, face unreadable. Finally, Celine said, 1 week? What? You have 1 week to prove you're not the same coward who ran. 1 week to show me you've changed. Then I decide if you stay or go. And if I fail, then you disappear again, and this time you stay gone. Kael felt something in his chest crack open. Deal. Celine nodded once, then walked away toward the wounded, leaving Kael standing in the mud and blood and firelight. Finian limped over, still holding the royal blade. So, the kid's voice was carefully neutral. You're really the Alpha King. Was, Kael corrected. Now I'm just a man trying to fix what he broke. That's going to be a hell of a project. Yeah, she's not going to make it easy. I don't want easy. Kael looked at Celine across the settlement, watched her kneel beside an injured fighter, watched her hands work with steady precision. I just want a chance. Finian studied him. You hurt her bad. I know. She's my sister. If you do it again, king or not, I'll find a way to make you pay. Kael looked at the kid and saw steel beneath the youth. Good. She deserves that kind of loyalty. Finian's expression softened slightly. 1 week. Don't waste it. He walked away, leaving Kael alone with his thoughts and the weight of everything he'd just set in motion. The truth was out, his identity exposed, And now every enemy who'd forced him to leave would know he was back, which meant the real war was just beginning. Kael looked up at the sky, at the stars burning through smoke, and felt his wolf settle beneath his skin. For 5 years, he'd lived in shadows, hunted traitors, bled in silence, all to clear the board, to make it safe for her. Now he had 1 week to prove it hadn't all been for nothing. 1 week to show Celine that the king who left was dead, and the man who came back would burn the world before he let her down again. He just hoped it would be enough. Because if it wasn't, if he lost her a second time, there wouldn't be a third chance. And Kael knew, bone deep and certain, that he wouldn't survive that. The first 3 days passed like glass under pressure. Waiting to shatter, Kael spent them rebuilding Thornwick's defenses alongside Celine's fighters, reinforcing weak points in the perimeter, training green warriors who'd never held a blade before the rogues started circling. He kept his distance from Celine. Let her watch him work. Let her see that his hands remembered how to build, not just destroy. She didn't speak to him unless necessary, didn't look at him longer than it took to give orders or assess his progress. But she was watching, always watching, testing him against some internal measure he couldn't see. On the 4th morning, everything changed. Kael was checking the southern watchtower when Finian came running, face white, holding a piece of parchment like it might explode. "We have a problem." Kael climbed down from the scaffolding. "What kind?" "The kind where messengers just arrived from 3 different packs, all carrying the same message." Finian handed over the parchment, hands shaking. "They know you're here." The letter was formal, precise, written in the kind of language that preceded war. To the settlement of Thornwick and the wolf known as Kael Draven. By order of the Allied Council of Free Packs, you are hereby summoned to answer for crimes of abandonment, dereliction of duty, and conspiracy against the sovereign territories. Failure to appear within 7 days will be considered an act of war. The settlement harboring the accused will be held equally responsible. It was signed by 5 different alphas, including Marcus Hale. Kael read it twice, feeling ice spread through his chest. "They're not just calling me out. They're threatening Celine's pack." Finian nodded. "If you don't show up, they'll attack Thornwick, claim we're harboring a fugitive king." "I am a fugitive king." "Then what do we do?" Kael looked toward the healer's hall where Celine was working. "We tell her the truth. Let her decide." He found her changing bandages on a fighter who'd taken claws to the ribs during the rogue attack. Her hands moved with mechanical precision, muscle memory taking over while her mind worked through problems he couldn't see. She looked up when he entered. "You have that look." "What look?" "The one that says everything's about to get worse." Celine tied off the bandage and stood. "What happened?" Kael handed her the letter. He watched her face as she read, watched the moment her jaw tightened, her eyes went flat, her entire body shifted into the posture of someone preparing for impact. When she finished, she folded the parchment carefully. "So, they're using me as leverage." "Yeah. How long do we have?" 7 days. "And if you don't go?" "They burn Thornwick to the ground and call it justice." Celine was quiet for a long moment. Then, "You're going to go." It wasn't a question. Kael shook his head. "I'm not leaving you defenseless. I'm not defenseless. Against 5 allied packs?" "Yes, you are." Her eyes flashed. "Then what's your plan? Walk into their trap and hope they don't execute you on sight?" "Something like that." "That's suicide." "Probably." Kael held her gaze. "But it keeps the war away from your door." Celine moved closer, voice dropping. "You think dying for me erases 5 years?" "No. I think it's the bare minimum of what I owe you. I don't want your death." "Then what do you want?" Her hands curled into fists. "I want you to stop trying to sacrifice yourself like it fixes anything. I want you to fight smart instead of throwing yourself at every threat. I want—" She stopped, breathing hard. "I want to stop feeling like everyone I care about is expendable." The words hung between them like broken glass. Kael felt something crack in his chest. "I'm not expendable." "Then stop acting like it. What if going is the only way to protect you?" Celine's laugh was bitter. "You keep saying that. Keep hiding behind protection like it justifies every terrible choice. But you know what I learned after you left? Real protection isn't making decisions for people. It's standing beside them when things get ugly. I stood alone because that's what kings do. And look where that got you. Alone. Hunted, broken. She stepped closer, and he could see tears she refused to let fall. You want to make things right? Stop being the king who sacrifices everything. Start being the man who fights beside me instead of for me. Kale stared at her and felt every wall he'd built start to crumble. You're right. What? You're right. I've been so focused on keeping you safe that I forgot to ask if you wanted to be protected or partnered. His voice roughened. I'm sorry. Celine looked at him like she was seeing something new. Then prove it. Don't go to that summit alone. Take me with you. Absolutely not. See? There you go again. Making decisions. This is different. That summit is a trap designed to kill me. I'm not dragging you into it. I'm already in it. Her voice hardened. They threaten my pack. That makes it my fight. Celine. No. She cut him off. You want to prove you've changed? Then trust me to stand beside you when it matters. Kale felt his wolf rise, every instinct screaming to protect her, to keep her far away from the wolves circling for his blood. But she was right. He'd spent 5 years making choices for her, and all it had done was break them both. So he did the hardest thing he'd ever done. He nodded. Okay. We go together, but we do it smart. Bring fighters you trust. Plan for the worst. Celine's expression shifted, surprise bleeding through the anger. You're actually listening to me. Trying to. Kale's throat tightened. I'm not great at it yet. A ghost of a smile crossed her face, then disappeared. This doesn't mean I forgive you. I know. Or trust you. I know that too. Good. She turned back to her patient, then paused. Kael? Yeah? Thank you for asking instead of deciding. He left before she could see how much those words wrecked him. They spent the next 2 days preparing. Selena chose 6 of her best fighters. Finian insisted on coming despite his healing leg. Kael sent word ahead through old contacts, trying to map the political landscape, trying to figure out who wanted him dead and who just wanted him gone. The answers weren't encouraging. On the 6th day, a rider arrived from the capital. Not a messenger. A ghost from Kael's past. Commander Thorne stepped into Thornwick like he owned it, gray-haired and scarred, wearing the insignia of the Royal Guard. Behind him, 20 soldiers formed up in perfect formation. Kael met him in the center of the settlement, heart hammering. Thorne had been his most trusted commander. The man who'd trained him to fight, taught him to lead, stood beside him through wars that had carved the kingdom into something brutal and necessary. The man who'd helped him fake his death and disappear. Commander. Kael kept his voice neutral, aware of Celine watching from the healer's hall. My king. Thorne's salute was crisp, automatic. It's been too long. Has it? 5 years too long. The commander's eyes swept the settlement, taking in the damage, the struggling pack, the woman watching from shadows. I see you've been busy, just surviving. Is that what we're calling it? Thorne moved closer, lowering his voice. You look like hell, smell like wolfsbane and regret, living under a false name, playing protector to a failing pack. This wasn't the plan. Plans change. Not without informing me. The edge in Thorne's voice was sharp enough to cut. I've spent 5 years holding the capital together, executing the traitors we identified, keeping your throne warm for when you decided to reclaim it. And then I hear you're here, playing house, exposing yourself for a woman who hates you, Kael's wolf snarled. Watch how you talk about her, or what? You'll fight me? Thorne's smile was cold. I taught you everything you know about combat. Don't forget that. What do you want, Commander? I want to know if you're coming back, if all the blood and sacrifice meant something, or if you're really throwing away a kingdom for a healer who can't forgive you. Kael felt ice slide down his spine. Why are you really here? Thorne gestured to his soldiers. I'm here to escort you to the summit. Make sure you arrive alive. You think I can't handle myself? I think you're compromised. Emotional, making stupid choices because you're thinking with something other than your head. The commander's voice dropped. The Allied Council isn't just calling you to answer for abandonment. They're planning to execute you, publicly. As an example, Kael's blood went cold. You're sure? I have sources inside 3 of the 5 packs. They've already built the execution platform, already drafted the charges. This summit is a show trial. Then why go at all? Because if you don't, they'll burn the settlement and everyone in it. Thorn looked towards Celine, including her. Cale's hands clenched. So what's your play? We don't go to the summit. We take the fight to them first, strike before they're ready, use the element of surprise. That's war. It's survival. Thorn stepped closer. You think you can walk into that hall and talk your way out? They've already decided you're guilty. The only question is whether you die on your knees or standing. Cale's mind raced. Everything in him screamed that Thorn was right, that walking into the summit was suicide, that the only rational move was to strike first. But Celine's words echoed in his head. Real protection is standing beside them when things get ugly. I'm going to the summit. Kyle kept his voice level. And I'm going to face the charges. You're insane. Maybe. But I'm done running. Done hiding. If they want to kill me, they can do it in front of the entire region. Let everyone see what the Allied Council really is. Thorn's jaw tightened. This is a mistake. It's my mistake to make. The commander stared at him for a long moment. Then, fine, but I'm coming with you, and if this goes sideways, I'm getting you out whether you like it or not. Cale nodded. Deal. Thorn turned to leave, then paused. One more thing. What? That woman. The healer. Is she worth dying for? Cale didn't hesitate. Yes. Then God's help you, because you're about to find out if she feels the same way. They left for the summit at dawn on the 7th day. 10 riders total. Celine, Finian, 4 Thornwick fighters, Kyle, Thorn, and 2 royal guards. They moved fast through territories that had once answered to Shadowfang and now belonged to whoever could hold them. Celine rode beside Kale, silent and tense. She hadn't spoken to him since Thorn arrived, and he could feel the questions building behind her eyes. Finally, halfway through the 2nd day, she broke. Your commander doesn't like me. He doesn't like complications. Is that what I am? Cale glanced at her. You're the reason I'm still breathing. Celine's expression stayed flat. He thinks you're making a mistake. He's probably right. Then why go? Because you asked me to trust you, to fight beside you instead of for you. Cale met her eyes. This is me trying. Something shifted in her face. Not forgiveness, not trust, but maybe the beginning of understanding. They rode in silence after that, and Cale tried not to think about the execution platform waiting at the end of this road. Deck. The summit was held in neutral territory, an old fortress that had belonged to Shadowfang once, and now belonged to no one. The Allied Council had claimed it for this meeting, filled it with warriors from 5 different packs, turned it into a courthouse designed for one verdict. Guilty. Kyle felt it the moment they rode through the gates. The weight of judgment, the hunger for blood, the satisfaction of wolves who'd finally cornered their prey. The main hall was packed. Alphas from across the region sat in a semicircle, with Marcus Hale at the center, flanked by 4 others Kyle recognized from before. Hard men, ruthless leaders, the kind who'd been waiting for Shadowfang to fall so they could carve up the pieces. Behind them, warriors lined the walls, hundreds of them, all armed, all watching. Celine's hand drifted to her blade. This is wrong. Cale kept his voice low. Stay close to me. They walked down the center aisle, and Kyle heard the whispers spreading like wildfire. That's him. The missing king. Look at him. Scarred, broken, nothing like the stories. He kept his spine straight and his eyes forward until they reached the center of the hall. Marcus stood, and the room went silent. Cale Draven. The Stoneclaw. Alpha's voice echoed off stone walls. Formerly of Shadowfang, you stand accused of abandoning your throne, breaking sacred oaths, and conspiring to destabilize the region. How do you answer? Kyle met his gaze. Not guilty. The room erupted in laughter, bitter, mocking. Marcus smiled. You disappeared for 5 years, left your kingdom in chaos. And you claim innocence? I left to eliminate threats. Kyle's voice cut through the noise. Traitors inside my own court, who were planning to use the people I cared about as weapons against me. Convenient excuse. It's the truth. Then prove it. Marcus gestured to the room. Show us evidence, names, bodies, anything that supports your story. Kale looked at Thorn, who stood against the wall with his soldiers. The commander's face was unreadable. I executed 17 council members. Kale kept his tone level, dismantled 3 separate conspiracies, eliminated threats that would have torn the kingdom apart from the inside. Where's your proof? Commander Thorn was with me. He can verify. Thorn stepped forward, and something in his expression made Kale's blood run cold. I'm afraid I can't verify that, my king. The words hit like a blade between the ribs. Kale stared at him. What? Thorn's face stayed neutral. I spent 5 years searching for you, following leads, trying to find where you'd gone. But I never found evidence of any conspiracy. No bodies, no executed traitors, just a king who vanished. The room was silent, watching. Kale felt the floor drop out from under him. You're lying, am I? Thorn's voice stayed calm. Or are you inventing justifications for abandonment? I told you everything, every name, every target. You helped me plan. I helped you disappear. Thorn's eyes were empty. Because you asked me to, because you said you needed time away. But I never saw evidence of the threats you claimed existed. Kale's world tilted. This wasn't happening. Thorn was his most trusted ally, the man who'd stood beside him through everything, the man who knew every detail of the conspiracy because he'd helped eliminate it. Unless the conspiracy had never been fully eliminated, unless Thorn himself had been part of it from the beginning. The realization hit like a physical blow, and Kale saw it in Thorn's eyes. The truth, the calculation, the cold satisfaction of a plan 5 years in the making. You. Kale's voice came out broken. It was you. Thorn's smile was small, sharp. I tried to kill you quietly. Poison, accidents, assassination attempts you always somehow survived. So I changed tactics. Made you think your presence endangered the woman you loved. Made you think running was the only way to save her. Kale couldn't breathe. Everything, all of it, the threats, the evidence, the conspiracy, all carefully constructed lies. And I fell for it. His voice cracked. I threw away everything because you convinced me it was the only way. You threw away everything because you were weak. Thorn's expression hardened. A strong king would have crushed his enemies and kept his woman. But you let fear make you a coward, made my job so much easier. Celine was staring at Kyle, horror dawning in her eyes. You left because he manipulated you. I left because I believed him. Kale felt like he was falling. I believed every word. And now you'll die because of it. Marcus stood, drawing the attention back. The Allied Council finds you guilty of abandonment and conspiracy. The sentence is death, to be carried out immediately. Warriors moved forward, surrounding them. Kale's wolf surged, demanding he fight, demanding blood, demanding he tear through everyone who'd orchestrated this betrayal. But Celine was beside him, and Finian, and 4 fighters who'd come because they trusted him. If he fought now, they'd all die. Thorn stepped closer, voice low enough only Kale could hear. You should have stayed gone. Should have let me reshape the kingdom without you, but you came back for her. And now she gets to watch you die knowing it was all for nothing. Kale met his former commander's eyes and saw nothing human there. Just ambition, cold and absolute. Why? His voice came out hoarse. Why do all this? Because I spent 30 years serving kings, fighting their wars, bleeding for their mistakes. Thorn's smile was razor thin, and I realized I'd be better at it than any of them, better than your father, better than you. You wanted the throne. I wanted to rebuild the kingdom properly, without weak kings who let love make them vulnerable. Thorn gestured at the Allied Council. These alphas understand power. They'll support my claim once you're dead. You really think they'll just hand you Shadowfang? I think they'll accept the king who eliminated the last obstacle to stability. The commander nodded to the warriors. Take him. Hands grabbed Kyle's arms, dragging him toward the platform that had been built in the center of the hall. He didn't resist. Couldn't resist. Not without getting Celine killed. She was screaming his name, fighting against the warriors holding her back. Finian was shouting. The Thornwick fighters were trying to break free, and Kyle felt everything inside him go quiet. This was it. The cost of 5 years of lies, of trusting the wrong person, of letting fear make him weak. He was going to die in front of Celine, and the last thing she'd know about him was that he'd been manipulated like a fool. They forced him to his knees on the platform. Marcus drew his blade, ceremonial and sharp, designed for execution. The Allied Council stood in judgment, and Kael saw satisfaction in their eyes. They'd won, eliminated the last remnant of Shadowfang power, could divide the kingdom without resistance. Any last words? Marcus raised the blade. Kael looked past him, past the crowd, to where Selene stood restrained and furious and absolutely beautiful in her rage. And he realized something. He'd spent 5 years trying to protect her by staying away. 5 years believing that his presence endangered her. 5 years letting fear dictate his choices. But Thorn had been wrong about one thing. Love hadn't made Kael weak. It had made him survive when dying would have been easier. It had made him hunt traitors through hell to clear the board. It had made him walk into a trap knowing he might not walk out, because the alternative was letting her face this alone. Love hadn't been his weakness. It had been his only real strength. And if he was going to die, he'd die making sure she knew that. Kael met Celine's eyes across the hall and spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. I loved you then, I love you now, and I'd do it all again. The blade started to fall, and Celine's wolf exploded through her restraints. She shifted mid-lunge, massive and golden and absolutely feral, tearing through warriors like they were made of paper. The hall erupted into chaos. Finian was fighting. The Thornwick fighters broke free, and Thorn's carefully orchestrated execution dissolved into a battle he hadn't planned for, because he'd underestimated one critical thing. Selene Arden didn't need protecting. She needed a partner. And right now, she was choosing to fight. Kael felt his own wolf surge in response, shattering the restraints, shifting in a blur of pain and power. He hit the first warrior before Marcus's blade finished its arc, drove his claws through the Alpha's guard, used the momentum to throw him off the platform. Around him, the hall descended into absolute carnage. And for the first time in 5 years, Kael Draven stopped trying to protect anyone and started fighting beside them instead. The hall became a slaughterhouse in the space between one heartbeat and the next. Kael's wolf tore through the first 3 warriors before they could register the shift, claws opening throats and bellies with surgical precision. Blood sprayed hot across his muzzle. Bodies hit stone with wet thuds. And somewhere in the chaos, he could hear Celine's snarl cutting through the screaming like a blade through silk. She fought like something feral, like rage given form and teeth, a golden blur of fur and fury that moved through the allied warriors with absolute brutality. Kael watched her rip a wolf's leg out from under it, heard the bone snap, saw her pivot without breaking stride to drive her jaws into another's spine. This was the woman he'd tried to protect by leaving. The woman he'd thought too precious to risk in the wars that came with loving a king. And she was carving through trained soldiers like they were nothing but obstacles between her and survival. Kael had been a fool to think she'd ever needed protecting. What she'd needed was a partner who trusted her to be exactly this dangerous. A blade whistled past his ear. Kael twisted, caught the attacking wolf by the throat mid-lunge, and slammed it into the stone floor hard enough to crack ribs. His wolf wanted to finish it, wanted to tear and maim until nothing remained but red and ruin, but there were too many enemies and not enough time. He shifted back to human form, grabbed a fallen sword, and used the reach advantage to drive back 2 more attackers. Around him, the Thornwick fighters were holding their own, backs to each other, moving in synchronized patterns that spoke of desperate experience. Finian fought like his sister, all controlled fury and precise strikes, ignoring the blood streaming from a gash across his ribs. And across the hall, Thorn watched it all with cold calculation. The commander hadn't drawn his weapon, hadn't joined the fight. He stood against the far wall with his royal guard flanking him, observing the chaos like a man watching pieces move across a game board, waiting for something. Kael felt ice slide down his spine. This was wrong. Thorn should be pressing the advantage, using superior numbers to crush the resistance. Instead, he was letting his forces engage piecemeal, letting Kael's group fight when they should already be overwhelmed. Because Thorn didn't want them dead yet. He wanted them exhausted, broken, desperate. He wanted the victory to mean something. Marcus Hale shifted back to human, blood streaming from a wound across his shoulder where Selene had caught him. The Stoneclaw Alpha's face twisted with rage as he grabbed a spear from a fallen warrior. "You stupid bitch!" He advanced on Celine, who'd just finished killing another wolf and hadn't seen him coming. You could have been a queen. Could have had everything. Instead, you're going to die for a king who doesn't deserve you. Kale was moving before conscious thought caught up, crossing the distance in a blur, intercepting the spear thrust meant for Celine's heart. The blade caught his ribs instead, tearing through muscle, scraping bone. Pain exploded white-hot through his chest, but he didn't let go. Couldn't let go. He grabbed the spear shaft with both hands and yanked Marcus forward, close enough to see the shock in the Alpha's eyes. Wrong! Kale's voice came out barely human. I never deserved her. But that doesn't mean I'll let you touch her. He headbutted Marcus hard enough to break the Alpha's nose, felt cartilage crunch, used the stunned moment to rip the spear free and drive it through Marcus's thigh. The Stoneclaw Alpha screamed and went down, clutching the wound while blood poured between his fingers. Kael turned, leaving Marcus bleeding, and found Celine staring at him. She'd shifted back to human, naked and covered in gore, her eyes wide with something between fury and disbelief. Around them the fighting had paused. Warriors on both sides pulled back, breathing hard, waiting to see what came next, because the moment hung there like a blade waiting to fall. The deposed king and the woman he'd destroyed, standing in a hall full of enemies, bleeding and broken, but still breathing. Thorn's slow clap echoed through the silence, touching. The commander stepped forward, his guards moving with him. Very dramatic, but ultimately pointless. Kale kept himself between Thorn and Celine. It's over. You lost. Did I? Thorn gestured to the hall. Count the bodies, my king. Count how many of yours are still standing versus mine. Kale didn't need to count. He could feel it. The exhaustion settling into his muscles, the blood loss making his vision swim, the handful of fighters still breathing behind him, all wounded, all running on fumes in desperation. They'd killed maybe a dozen of the Allied forces. There were still 40 or 50 warriors standing, fresh, armed, waiting for the order to finish this. The math was brutal and absolute. You can't win this fight. Thorn's voice stayed calm. You know it. I know it. Everyone in this hall knows it, so stop wasting lives and surrender. Kale tightened his grip on the sword. And if I do, I'll make your death quick, painless, a king's execution instead of a traitor's. Thorn's eyes flicked to Celine. And I'll let her live. Let her pack survive. All you have to do is kneel. Behind him, Kael heard Celine's sharp intake of breath, heard Finian curse under his breath, heard the weight of impossible choices settling over everyone who'd followed him here. This was the moment, the choice that would define everything. Kneel and save the people he loved, or fight and watch them die beside him. 5 years ago, he would have chosen sacrifice, would have knelt, would have let Thorn take his head if it meant Celine survived. But Celine's words echoed in his memory. Real protection is standing beside them when things get ugly. And standing beside her meant trusting her to make her own choice about what came next. Kael looked back at her over his shoulder. Your call. Celine's eyes widened. What? Your pack, your fighters, your life. He held her gaze. I'm not deciding for you anymore. If you want to live, I'll kneel. If you want to fight, I'll stand. But this time, you choose. The hall went absolutely silent. Celine stared at him, and Kael could see her processing, could see the war between survival and pride, between pragmatism and something fiercer that had kept her alive through 5 years of hell. When she spoke, her voice was steady. We fight, you'll die. Then we die standing, her jaw set, together. Kael felt something in his chest crack open, something that had been locked away since the night he walked away from everything that mattered. He turned back to Thorn and smiled. You heard the lady? The commander's expression darkened. Then you're all fools. Maybe. Kael shifted his grip on the sword, felt his wolf rise beneath his skin. But we're fools who go down swinging. Thorn raised his hand, and 50 warriors readied their weapons. This was it. The end. Kael knew the math, knew they couldn't survive this. But knowing didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that Celine had chosen to fight beside him, and he'd honored that choice by letting her make it. If they died here, at least they died as partners. Thorn's hand started to drop, and the fortress doors exploded inward. The concussive blast sent warriors sprawling. Stone and timber rained down. and through the smoke and dust, figures poured into the hall like an army pulled from nightmares. Kael's heart stopped, because he recognized them, all of them. The wolves flooding through the broken doors wore mismatched armor and carried weapons that had seen hard use. But their formation was precise, and their movement spoke of military training that didn't come from border packs. They were Royal Guard, his Royal Guard. The soldiers he'd thought scattered after his disappearance. The ones he'd assumed had moved on or died or forgotten him. But they hadn't forgotten. At their head strode a woman Kael hadn't seen in 5 years. Captain Lyra Kane, scarred and gray-haired, carrying a war axe that had tasted more blood than most soldiers saw in a lifetime. She surveyed the hall with ice-cold eyes, took in the carnage, the standoff, the wounded king bleeding in the center of it all. Then she looked at Thorn, and her smile was all teeth. "Commander," her voice cut through the shocked silence, "I believe you're in my seat." Thorn's face went white. "You're dead." Reports of my death were greatly exaggerated. Lyra advanced with her soldiers fanning out behind her, surrounding the Allied forces. "Seems I missed quite the party. Traitors executing kings, conspiracies coming to light, the usual court drama. How are you here?" "Because unlike you, I actually spent 5 years hunting down the conspiracy." Lyra's eyes were chips of ice. "Found your contacts in 3 packs, traced your funding, uncovered the assassination attempts you blamed on phantom enemies." She gestured to her soldiers. "And I brought receipts. You can't prove anything. Can't I?" Lyra pulled a bundle of letters from her belt and threw them at Thorn's feet. "Correspondence between you and the Allied Council. Plans to eliminate the king. Instructions for fabricating evidence. All signed in your hand." The hall erupted in whispers. Allied warriors exchanged glances. Even Marcus, still bleeding from his thigh wound, stared at Thorn with dawning horror. "You set this up." Marcus's voice shook. "All of it. The regional instability. The rogue attacks. You told us Kael abandoned his throne, but you orchestrated his disappearance." Thorn's jaw clenched. "I did what was necessary. You used us." Another alpha stood, fury written across his face. "Made us complicit in treason." It wasn't treason. Thorn's control was slipping, voice climbing. It was evolution. The kingdom needed strong leadership, not a king who let sentiment make him weak. Lyra laughed, sharp and bitter. "And you thought that leader was you? It should have been. Based on what? 30 years of service? Thorn, you were a competent commander, nothing more." She stepped closer, and he retreated. "You weren't fit to shine his boots, let alone wear his crown." "I would have been better. You would have been a tyrant." Lyra's voice went flat. "The kind who burns kingdoms trying to prove he deserves them. Better a tyrant than a coward who runs." "He didn't run." Lyra turned to look at Kael, and something in her expression softened. "He believed you. Believed the threats were real. Believed leaving was the only way to save innocent lives." She looked back at Thorn. "You manipulated a good king into destroying himself, and then you tried to profit from the wreckage." Thorn's hand went to his sword. "This isn't over." "Yes," Lyra's voice went cold as winter. "It is." Her soldiers closed in, surrounding Thorn and his guard. The commander looked around, calculating odds, measuring exits, searching for some way to salvage the situation. There wasn't one. Slowly, with the expression of a man watching his life's work crumble, Thorn raised his hands in surrender. Kael felt his knees buckle. The adrenaline draining away left him hollow and shaking, the spear wound in his ribs screaming for attention he'd been ignoring. Celine caught him before he hit the ground, her arms wrapping around him despite the blood coating both their skin. "I've got you." Her voice was rough. "Just breathe." "Lyra." Kael forced the word out. "How did you know?" "I've been tracking you for months." The captain crossed to him, kneeling. "Lost the trail 6 times, but you kept leaving breadcrumbs. Dead rogues with execution-style kills, border towns with mysterious protectors." She smiled slightly. "And then word reached me that a wanderer named Riker Vale had appeared in Thornwick and taken on 30 rogues alone. Didn't take a genius to connect the dots. You could have contacted me. I wanted to see what you were doing, whether you'd actually changed or if you were just playing a longer game." Lyra glanced at Celine. "Looks like you found something worth changing for. Something like that." Kael's vision swam. The numbers. "How many soldiers came back?" 73. Out of the original 200. Lyra's voice gentled. The rest died or scattered, but these 73 never stopped believing, never stopped waiting for you to reclaim what was yours. I don't deserve that kind of loyalty. Probably not. But you have it anyway. Around them, the Allied forces were standing down, weapons lowering, warriors backing away from a fight they no longer understood. The Alphas who'd sat in judgment were conferring in urgent whispers, realizing they'd been manipulated into treason, trying to figure out how to salvage their positions. Marcus Hale was being tended by his own fighters, the spear wound in his thigh brutal but survivable. He looked at Kael across the hall, and for a moment their eyes met. The Stoneclaw Alpha's expression was complicated, angry, humiliated, but underneath something that might have been grudging respect. She chose you. Marcus's voice carried across the quiet. Even after everything, even knowing what it cost. He shook his head. You're either the luckiest bastard alive or the most blessed. Kael tightened his hold on Celine. Neither. I'm just stubborn. Marcus actually smiled. That you are. Finian limped over, still bleeding but grinning like a fool. So, the kid's voice was light despite the pain. We're not dying today? Doesn't look like it. Good. Because I have questions, like why you didn't mention you had a whole secret army waiting in the wings. I didn't know they existed. Kael looked at Lyra. Thought they'd moved on. We're Royal Guard. The captain's voice was firm. We don't move on. We endure. Celine's arms were still around Kael, holding him upright, and he could feel her shaking. Adrenaline crash, battle fatigue, the cost of fighting like a demon when your body was running on empty. He turned in her grip, careful of his wounds, and met her eyes. They were bright with unshed tears and fury and relief, all tangled together in a knot too complicated to name. You're an idiot, her voice cracked. Telling me to choose whether we live or die like it's a casual question? It was your choice to make. We could have survived, could have walked away, and spent the rest of our lives wondering if we should have fought. Kael's hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing away a tear she didn't seem to know had fallen. I'm done making those choices for you. Celine's laugh was half sob. You're really committing to this partner thing, trying to. You're terrible at it. I know. He leaned his forehead against hers. But I'm learning. She kissed him then, hard and desperate and tasting like blood and smoke and 5 years of grief finally breaking open. Kael kissed her back with everything he had left, which wasn't much, but it was real and raw and more honest than anything he'd done in half a decade. When they broke apart, the hall was watching. Soldiers, alphas, fighters from both sides, all staring at the deposed king and the healer who'd chosen him when logic said she should have walked away. Lyra cleared her throat. Touching as this is, we have logistics to address. Kael pulled back from Celine reluctantly. What kind of logistics? The kind where we figure out if you're reclaiming your throne or if we're overthrowing what's left of the Allied Council and starting fresh. The captain's tone was matter of fact. Because right now, the region is a power vacuum waiting to collapse into chaos. I can't just walk back into the capital and expect people to follow me. Why not? Because I abandoned them. Kael's voice roughened. Spent 5 years letting them think I didn't care. You can't build a kingdom on that kind of foundation. You built it on conquest the first time. Lyra shrugged. This time you build it on honesty. Tell them the truth. Show them you're different. Let them decide if you're worth following. And if they reject me, then we find another way. But you don't know until you try. Kael looked around the hall, at Thorn in chains surrounded by guards, at the Allied Alphas whispering urgently, trying to distance themselves from the conspiracy, at Marcus Hale watching with calculating eyes, at Finian and the Thornwick fighters, exhausted and bleeding but alive, at Celine still pressed against his side like she was afraid he'd disappear if she let go. And Kael realized something fundamental had shifted inside him. 5 years ago, he would have seen this moment as a chance to reclaim power, to reassert dominance, to remind everyone why they should fear the Alpha King of Shadowfang. But standing here now, covered in blood and barely standing, he didn't want fear. He wanted something harder to build and easier to lose. He wanted trust. I'll address the region. Kael's voice came out steady despite the pain. Publicly. Tell them everything, the conspiracy, the manipulation, The choices I made and why I made them. Let them judge. That's a risk. Lyra's eyes narrowed. People don't always forgive kings who disappear. I know, but I'm done ruling through fear and secrets. If I take the throne again, it's because people choose to follow, not because I force them. And if they don't choose you, then I find another way to help. Kael looked at Celine. I've already found the most important thing. Everything else is negotiable. Celine's hand found his, fingers interlacing. You're really willing to give up the crown? I gave it up once to protect you. I'd do it again to stand beside you, even if that means being nobody, especially if it means being nobody with you. Her smile was small and fierce. You're getting better at this partnership thing. Don't get used to it. I'll probably screw up again. Probably. But at least you'll screw up while asking my opinion first. Across the hall, one of the allied alphas stepped forward. An older wolf, gray-muzzled and scarred, who'd sat in judgment but hadn't spoken until now. Alpha King. His voice was gravelly. Or whatever you're calling yourself these days. I'm Garrett of Iron Peak. And I have a question. Kael straightened despite the pain. Ask it. If we let you walk out of here alive, what's to stop you from coming back with an army and crushing everyone who stood against you today? Nothing. Kael met his eyes. Except my word that I won't. Your word. Garrett's laugh was bitter. Forgive me if that doesn't inspire confidence. I don't expect it to. But I'll earn it. One choice at a time. One honest answer at a time. Until either you trust me or you kill me. Those are your options. The hall went silent again. Garrett studied him for a long moment. Then, you've changed. I had to. Why? Because the alternative was losing everything that mattered. Kael's grip on Celine's hand tightened. And I've already lost enough. Garrett looked at Celine, then back at Kael. The woman. She's your weakness. No. Kael's voice was absolute. She's my strength. And the reason I'm still breathing. The Iron Peak Alpha considered this. Then, slowly, he knelt. One by one, the other alphas followed. Not all of them. Not immediately. But enough. Enough to shift the balance from execution to negotiation. Lyra watched with satisfaction. Looks like you might get that second chance after all. Kael didn't feel victorious, just exhausted. What happens to Thorn? Trial. Execution. The usual. Lyra's voice was flat. He orchestrated treason on a scale that destabilized an entire region. There's only one punishment for that. Make it public. Kael forced the words out. Let everyone see what happens to those who manipulate kings and sacrifice innocence for power. Done. And the Allied Council? They'll face consequences, but probably not execution. Most of them were pawns. Lyra's expression hardened. The real architect is already in chains. Kael nodded, feeling the weight of judgment settle over him again. Different this time. Not the burden of a king trying to hold power, but the responsibility of a leader trying to earn trust. It was terrifying in a completely new way. Celine leaned into him, and he could feel her exhaustion matching his own. We need medical attention. Probably. You're bleeding everywhere. So are you. I'm a healer. I'm used to it. That's not reassuring. Kael looked down at himself and realized she was right. The spear wound in his ribs was still bleeding steadily, soaking through what remained of his shirt. Claws marks striped his arms and chest, and he was pretty sure something in his left shoulder was dislocated. Celine wasn't much better. Bite wounds covered her arms. Blood matted her hair, and she was favoring her right leg in a way that suggested damaged muscle or torn ligaments. They were a disaster, both of them, held together by adrenaline and stubbornness and something fiercer that refused to let them fall. Lyra signaled to her soldiers, "Get them medical attention, and someone find clothes for the lady before this gets even more awkward." Finian was already shrugging out of his cloak, handing it to Celine with averted eyes. "Here, before my brain breaks from seeing things I can't unsee." Celine wrapped the cloak around herself, and Kael saw her wince as the movement pulled damaged muscles. "You okay?" "I will be." Her voice was steady. "We both will be." Kael wanted to believe that, wanted to think that surviving this meant they'd survived the worst of it, but he'd been a king long enough to know that battles were easy, compared to what came after. Now they had to rebuild, had to face the consequences of 5 years of chaos, had to prove that trust could be earned and broken things could be mended. And they had to do it together, as partners, with the whole region watching to see if they failed. No pressure. A soldier approached with bandages and medical supplies, and Kael let himself be tended while his mind raced through logistics. The capital would need to be secured, the remaining traders rooted out, trade routes reestablished, pack alliances rebuilt from scratch. It was overwhelming. It was impossible. It was exactly the kind of challenge that would have made the old Kael Draven retreat into cold calculation and ruthless efficiency. But the old Kael was dead. Burned away in 5 years of hunting shadows and learning what it cost to lose everything. What remained was something different, something that could look at impossible odds and think maybe instead of never. Celine's hand found his again, and Kael realized she was thinking the same thing, seeing the same mountain ahead of them, weighing the same terrible odds. We can do this. Her voice was quiet. Right? Kael looked at her, at the woman who'd chosen to fight beside him when surrender would have been smarter. The woman who'd torn through warriors to save a king who didn't deserve saving. The woman who'd kissed him like forgiveness wasn't impossible, just hard-won and slow. Yeah. His throat tightened. We can do this. How do you know? Because I've seen what you can survive. And if you can rebuild a pack from nothing, we can rebuild a kingdom. That's different, is it? Both require trust. Both require people choosing to follow instead of being forced. Both require leaders who actually give a damn about the people they're protecting. Celine was quiet for a moment. Then, you really think you can be that kind of leader? I think I can try. With help. From who? You. Kael met her eyes. If you're willing. She stared at him, and he could see her measuring the cost. The weight of standing beside a king. The target it would paint on her back. The responsibility of helping rebuild something that had already failed once. Then she smiled, small and fierce and absolutely devastating. Okay. Just okay? Don't push your luck. Kael laughed, and it hurt his ribs, and he didn't care. Across the hall, Lyra was organizing soldiers, securing prisoners, establishing order from chaos with the kind of efficiency that made her legendary. The allied alphas were being escorted to separate chambers, their fates to be decided later. Thorn was being dragged away in chains, his face a mask of fury and disbelief. And Kael stood in the center of it all, bleeding and broken and more terrified than he'd ever been on any battlefield. Because fighting enemies was easy. Earning trust was the hardest thing he'd ever attempted. But Celine's hand was warm in his, and her presence beside him felt like armor against the fear. Together. She said it like a promise. We do this together. Together. Kael repeated. And for the first time in 5 years, he believed they might actually survive what came next. The hall doors opened again, and a messenger stumbled in, covered in road dust and blood, breathing hard from a hard ride. Captain Kane! The messenger's voice shook. We have a problem. Lyra's head snapped up. What kind? The kind where the capital is under siege. Enemy forces appeared 3 hours ago, thousands of them, flying banners we don't recognize, and they're demanding the return of the true king. The room went absolutely silent. Kael felt ice slide through his veins. Who's leading them? The messenger swallowed hard. They say it's the king's brother, the one everyone thought died in the northern wars. Kael's world tilted, because he didn't have a brother. Had never had a brother. Which meant someone was using his bloodline as a weapon, claiming legitimacy through lies, and besieging the capital while the region was already fractured and weak. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. And standing there, wounded and exhausted and barely holding himself upright, Kael realized that every choice he'd made, every sacrifice he'd endured, every moment of the last 5 years had all been leading to this. One final test. One last chance to prove he was the king his people needed instead of the one he'd been. Celine's hand tightened in his. What do we do? Kael looked at her, at Lyra, at the soldiers and alphas and fighters, all waiting for direction. And he made the only choice that mattered. We go to war. The ride to the capital took 3 days through territories that remembered what Shadowfang used to be and hadn't forgiven what it became. Kale led the column with Celine beside him, Lyra and 73 royal guards at their backs, and a collection of allied alphas who'd chosen cooperation over execution trailing behind like wolves who hadn't decided if they were joining the pack or just following the scent of blood. Every mile closer to the capital, Kyle felt the weight of what he'd abandoned pressing down harder. Villages they passed were half empty, fields untended, walls crumbling from neglect and rogue attacks that nobody had stopped because there was no king to enforce pack law anymore. People watched them ride by with hollow eyes that had learned not to hope, not to trust promises from warriors who claimed they were there to help. This was the cost of his choices. Not abstract, not theoretical. Real suffering carved into the faces of people who'd needed a leader and gotten silence instead. Celine rode close enough their knees occasionally brushed, and Kyle drew strength from her presence the way a drowning man clutches driftwood. She didn't speak much during the journey, just watched the ruined landscape with healer's eyes that cataloged every wound, every scar, every sign of a kingdom bleeding out from neglect. On the second night, camped in the ruins of what had once been a thriving trade post, she finally broke her silence. "It's worse than I thought." Kale looked up from the fire he'd been staring into without seeing. "The damage?" "All of it. The infrastructure, the people, the trust." She was quiet for a moment. "You can't fix this with one battle." "I know. Do you?" "Because you have that look again. The one where you're calculating how much you can sacrifice to make things right." Kael's hands tightened on the cup of bitter tea someone had brewed. "What if sacrifice is all I have left to give? Then you're still thinking like the old king." Celine moved closer, firelight catching the gold in her eyes. "The one who thought leadership meant carrying everything alone until it crushed you. What's the alternative? You build something new. Not a kingdom held together by one strong wolf at the top, but a network of packs that actually support each other." She gestured to the allied alphas camped nearby. "They followed you here because you were honest, because you didn't threaten or manipulate. You gave them a choice. And when the next crisis comes, when they need a king to make hard decisions, then you make those decisions with counsel instead of isolation." Her voice softened. "You don't have to be invincible, Kael. You just have to be present." The words settled into his chest like stones dropping into still water, ripples spreading outward to touch places that had been numb for 5 years. Being present meant being vulnerable, meant letting people see him fail, meant trusting others to carry weight he'd always shouldered alone. It was terrifying in a way combat had never been. Across the fire, Finian was sharpening his blade with methodical precision, but Kael could tell the kid was listening. Lyra sat with her soldiers, going over maps and supply lists, but her eyes kept drifting to Kael and Celine with an expression that might have been approval. They were watching him learn something he should have known all along. That strength wasn't about standing alone against impossible odds. It was about having the courage to ask for help when you needed it. Kael looked at Celine, at the woman who'd fought beside him when she should have walked away, and felt something fundamental shift in his understanding of what it meant to lead. "Teach me." Her eyebrows rose. "What? How to do this? How to build instead of just protect? How to trust people to carry their own weight?" He held her gaze. "I've spent 30 years being a warrior and a king. I don't know how to be a partner. You're learning, not fast enough." Celine smiled, small and fierce. "Then it's lucky you have time, because we're not doing this overnight. How long do we have?" "However long it takes." Her hand found his across the fire. "There's no deadline on becoming the person you want to be, just the choice to keep trying." Kale felt his throat tighten. "What if I fail?" "Then you get up and try again. That's what partnership means. I catch you when you fall. You catch me when I fall. We figure it out together." The simplicity of it was staggering. No grand strategy, no master plan, just two people choosing to stand beside each other through whatever came next. Kyle had fought wars with more complexity and less honesty. "Okay." His voice came out rough. "We do it your way." "Our way," Celine corrected. "This only works if we both have a say. Our way." They sat in silence after that, but it was the comfortable kind. The kind that came from understanding growing between two people who'd survived hell and found each other on the other side. Finian looked up from his blade. You two are disgustingly functional for people who were trying to kill each other a week ago. We weren't trying to kill each other. Celine's tone was mild. I was trying to kill him. He was trying to let me. That's not better. It's accurate. Kale almost laughed. Your sister has a point. Don't encourage her. Finian went back to sharpening his blade. I have to live with her after this is over. I'd prefer she not get more insufferable. Too late. Celine's smile widened. I've been insufferable since birth. It's my greatest talent. The banter felt surreal after everything they'd been through, like finding flowers growing in battlefield mud. But Kael recognized it for what it was. Healing. The kind that happened when people stopped bracing for the next blow and started believing there might be space to breathe. He wanted more of this. Wanted to build a kingdom where people could laugh around fires instead of counting their dead. Where healers didn't have to ration supplies and young wolves didn't have to learn combat before they learned to read. It felt impossible. It felt necessary. On the third day, they crested the final ridge and saw the capital spread out below them. Smoke rose from a dozen fires inside the walls. The siege forces were camped in a half circle around the southern gates, thousands of warriors flying banners that Kael had never seen before, black and silver. Wolf's head crowned in thorns. The symbol wasn't Shadowfang, wasn't any pack he recognized. It was completely fabricated, designed to look legitimate while claiming authority through bloodline lies. Whoever was leading this force knew how to play the game. Lyra rode up beside him, surveying the scene with tactical precision. Well, we're outnumbered 3-1, possibly 4. Sounds about right. Kael kept his tone dry. You have a plan? Talk first. Fight if talking fails. That's a terrible plan. You have a better one? Lyra considered. No, but I reserve the right to say I told you so when this goes sideways. Noted. They descended toward the siege camp under a white flag that Celine had insisted on. Kael would have preferred to ride in armed and ready, let his presence speak for itself, but she'd pointed out that starting with violence made every other option harder. So they approached with peace signals raised, and Kael felt every instinct screaming that this was a mistake. The siege forces parted to let them through, warriors watching with expressions ranging from curiosity to hostility. At the center of the camp, a pavilion had been erected, large, ostentatious, the kind of display that announced power even if the power was stolen. Inside the pavilion, a man sat on a throne that had been dragged from somewhere and set up like this was a royal court instead of a military camp. He was young, maybe 25, dark-haired and sharp-featured with eyes that tracked their approach like a predator measuring prey. He looked absolutely nothing like Kael, which made the claim of brotherhood even more absurd. The young man stood as they entered, and his smile was all performance. Brother? His voice carried false warmth. It's been too long. Kael stopped 10 feet away, Celine at his side, Lyra and a handful of guards flanking them. We've never met. Haven't we? The false brother tilted his head. Memory can be such a fragile thing, especially after trauma. I don't have a brother. Our father had many indiscretions. Surely you can't know all of them. I knew him well enough to know he wasn't capable of keeping secrets like that. Kael's voice went flat. So let's skip the theater. Who are you really? The young man's smile didn't waver. I'm the heir your father never acknowledged, the son born to a woman he couldn't marry, the rightful king of Shadowfang, based on what proof? Bloodline. The false brother gestured, and a woman stepped forward carrying a wooden box. Inside, Kael could see official-looking documents, seals that appeared legitimate, letters supposedly from his father acknowledging a bastard son. All forged. Had to be. But convincing enough that desperate people might believe them. This is impressive work. Kael kept his tone almost admiring. How long did it take to fabricate all this? The false brother's expression flickered. I'm not. Yes, you are. Kael stepped forward, and his dominance rolled out unchecked. I can smell the lie on you. You're not royal blood. You're just another opportunist trying to claim a crown while the kingdom's bleeding out. I have proof. You have paperwork. Not the same thing. Kael's eyes narrowed. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to take your forged documents and your borrowed army and leave. Peacefully. Before I demonstrate why trying to steal my throne is a fatal mistake. The false brother's facade cracked completely. Your throne? You abandoned it, left it empty for 5 years while the region tore itself apart. You don't get to waltz back in and reclaim what you threw away. You're right. Kael's voice softened. I don't get to reclaim anything. I have to earn it. But you? You're not even trying to earn it. You're just taking. What's the difference? The difference is I'm asking the people if they want me back. You're holding a sword to their throats and demanding they call you king. The false brother stared at him, and Kael saw calculation happening behind his eyes. Saw him weighing options, measuring risks, trying to figure out if there was a path to victory. Then the young man smiled, and it was ugly. You want to ask the people? Fine. Let's ask them. He gestured, and warriors dragged forward a dozen prisoners, citizens from the capital, bound and gagged and terrified. The false brother drew a knife and held it to the nearest prisoner's throat. Here's your choice, brother. Walk away and let me have the throne, or watch these people die because you couldn't let go of power. The pavilion went absolutely silent. Kael felt Celine's hand on his arm, felt her tension radiating like heat, felt every eye in the pavilion watching to see what the returned king would do when faced with an impossible choice. This was the test, the moment that would define everything. And Kael realized something with crystalline clarity. The old king would have tried to save them, would have charged forward or surrendered or done something desperate and heroic that put all the weight on his shoulders. But the old king had died 5 years ago in a throne room full of lies. What remained was something different. Someone who'd learned that strength wasn't about carrying everything alone. Kael looked at the false brother and smiled. You made a mistake. The young man's grip on the knife tightened. What mistake? You assumed I'm the only one here who matters. Then Kael stepped back and Celine stepped forward. She moved with the calm precision of someone who'd spent years navigating impossible situations, and when she spoke, her voice carried to every corner of the pavilion. You're holding hostages because you think it gives you power. But here's what you don't understand about power. Her eyes locked on the false brother. Real power isn't making people fear you, it's making them choose to follow you. Celine gestured to the prisoners. These people are terrified. But not of us, of you, because you've proven you're willing to hurt innocents to get what you want. The false brother's smile wavered. Your point? My point is that Kael came here under a peace flag, came here willing to talk instead of fight, came here offering you a chance to walk away with your life. She stepped closer. And you responded by threatening to murder civilians, so now everyone watching knows exactly what kind of leader you'd be. The prisoners were watching her now, hope flickering in their eyes. Celine kept going. You wanted to ask the people who they'd choose? Fine, let's ask them. She turned to the nearest prisoner, a woman maybe 40 years old with gray hair and defiant eyes. You. If you had a choice between a king who left to protect people and came back to earn forgiveness versus a would-be king who holds knives to throats, who would you choose? The false brother moved to gag her, but Celine's hand shot out, catching his wrist with strength that made him gasp. Let her speak. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Then the woman spoke, voice shaking but clear. I'd choose the king who came back, because at least he's trying to do better. One by one, Celine asked the other prisoners, and one by one, they chose Kael, not because they'd forgiven him, not because they trusted him, but because the alternative was worse, and sometimes in broken kingdoms, you didn't get good choices, just less terrible ones. By the time Celine finished, the false brother's face was white with fury. You can't just... Yes, she cut him off. I can, because this is what leadership actually looks like, giving people a voice instead of silencing them. The false brother lunged at her with the knife, and Kael moved on pure instinct. Crossed the distance in a blur, caught the descending blade with his bare hand, felt it cut deep into his palm as he wrenched it away, and drove his fist into the young man's jaw hard enough to drop him. The pavilion erupted into chaos. Warriors on both sides drew weapons. Lyra's guards moved to defend. And Kael stood over the false brother with blood dripping from his hand and murder in his eyes. But he didn't kill him. Didn't finish it the way the old king would have. Didn't make an example or establish dominance through violence. Instead, Kael looked at the warriors surrounding them and spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. I don't want your loyalty through fear. don't want you to follow me because I'm the strongest or the most ruthless. I want you to follow because you choose to, because you believe we can build something better than what we had." He gestured to the false brother, unconscious and bleeding. This man lied about his bloodline, threatened innocence, chose violence over dialogue. And if you want to follow someone like that, I won't stop you, won't hunt you down or punish you for it. Kael looked around the pavilion, meeting eyes, letting them see his sincerity. But if you're tired of leaders who take instead of build, who threaten instead of protect, who see you as tools instead of people, then I'm asking you to give me a chance. One chance to prove I can be different. The silence stretched. Then one warrior lowered his weapon, then another, then a dozen more, until the siege forces were standing down without a fight, and the false brother's army was melting away like snow in spring sun. Because Kael had given them permission to leave, and in doing so had shown them something more powerful than dominance. He'd shown them choice. Lyra let out a breath she'd been holding. Well, that was either brilliant or insane. Both. Celine's smile was shaky. Definitely both. The capital gates opened and people poured out. Not warriors, citizens. Families who'd been trapped inside during the siege. They approached cautiously, uncertain, but moving forward despite their fear. An old man stepped to the front. Kael recognized him. Elder Marcus, who'd served on his father's council and stayed loyal through transitions of power that had killed lesser men. "My king," the elder's voice was rough. "You came back." "I did." "Why?" Kael looked at Celine, then back at Marcus. "Because I had to. Because leaving was the wrong choice, and I needed to face that. What happens now? Now we rebuild. Together. If you'll have me." Marcus studied him for a long moment. Then, slowly, the old man knelt. Behind him, the citizens followed. Not all of them, not immediately, but enough. Enough to matter. Kael felt his throat close up, felt the weight of their trust settling over him like armor made of glass. Fragile. Precious. Easy to shatter if he wasn't careful. He looked at Celine and she nodded. Together they walked through the gates into the capital Kael had abandoned 5 years ago, and for the first time since he'd left, he felt like he might actually deserve a second chance. The throne room was exactly as he'd left it, dust-covered and empty, with his father's crown sitting on a pedestal like an accusation. Kael stood in front of it for a long time, feeling the weight of history and expectation pressing down on him. Celine stood beside him, Lyra and Finian flanking them, while citizens and warriors filled the hall to watch what came next. This was the moment. The choice that would define everything. Take the crown and become the king again, or walk away and find another path. Kael reached for the crown, lifted it, felt the cold metal against his palms. Then he turned and handed it to Celine. The hall went silent. "What are you doing?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "Making you an offer." Kael held her gaze. "Stand beside me, not as a consort or a queen in title only, but as an equal. Help me build this kingdom into something that actually serves its people instead of using them. I'm not royalty. Neither was I until my father died and left me this mess." Kael's smile was bitter. "Bloodline doesn't make you fit to lead. Choice does. And you've proven over and over that you make better choices than I do." Celine stared at the crown like it might bite her. "This is insane." "Probably. But I'm done doing things the traditional way. The traditional way got us 5 years of chaos and a kingdom that almost collapsed." She looked up at him. "So what do you say? Want to help me break every rule and rebuild from scratch?" Celine's hands trembled as she took the crown. Then, instead of putting it on, she set it back on the pedestal. "We don't wear it." Her voice was firm. "Not yet. Not until we've actually earned the right to call ourselves leaders." Kael felt something in his chest unlock. Agreed. They turned to face the assembled crowd, and Kael spoke with Celine at his side. "This kingdom fell apart because I made choices alone, because I thought strength meant carrying everything without help. But I was wrong." He gestured to Celine. "From now on, we lead together, make decisions together, bear the weight together. And if you can't accept that, if you need a king who rules through force and fear, then you should leave now. Because that's not who I am anymore." No one left. They stood there watching, waiting to see if the words matched actions. And Kael realized that this was the work. Not one grand gesture, not one dramatic battle, just showing up every day and choosing to be better than yesterday, choosing to listen instead of command, choosing to build instead of conquer. It would take years, decades maybe, and there would be failures along the way, moments where he fell back into old patterns and had to be reminded that partnership meant sharing power, not hoarding it. But with Celine beside him, he thought he might actually succeed. The first month was brutal. They established a council of alphas from across the region, not a hierarchy with Kael at the top, but a network of equals who made decisions through consensus. It was slow, frustrating. Every discussion took 3 times longer than if Kael had just made an executive decision. But the decision stuck, because people had ownership, because they'd been part of the process instead of just following orders. Trade routes reopened, rogue attacks decreased as pack law was enforced consistently, villages started rebuilding, children started playing in streets instead of hiding inside crumbling walls. It was working, slowly, imperfectly, but working. Celine threw herself into the healing infrastructure, training new healers, establishing supply chains, making sure every pack had access to medicine instead of just the wealthy ones. She worked 18-hour days and came to bed exhausted, and Kael learned to support her the way she supported him. Not by taking over, not by trying to fix everything, just by being present. Finian became Kael's liaison to younger wolves, the ones who'd grown up during the chaos and didn't remember what stability looked like. The kid had a gift for connecting with people who felt forgotten, and Kael learned more about his kingdom from Finian's reports than from any formal council meeting. Lyra rebuilt the royal guard into something that actually served the people instead of just protecting the throne. She was ruthless about rooting out corruption and gentle about helping soldiers learn that strength could include compassion. And Kael learned what it meant to lead without carrying everything alone. He failed sometimes, fell back into old patterns of making decisions without consulting others, got frustrated with the slow pace of consensus and tried to push through changes unilaterally. But Celine called him on it every time, gently, firmly, without judgment. And he learned. 6 months after the siege, they held a coronation. Not the traditional kind. They invited every pack in the region, opened the capital to anyone who wanted to witness, and instead of one person being crowned, they created something new. A dual leadership. King and queen, equal in authority, balanced in power. Kael and Celine stood before the assembled region, and this time when the crown was offered, they took it together, held it between them. A symbol of shared responsibility instead of solitary burden. The crowd roared approval, and Kael felt tears he didn't bother hiding track down his face. This was what he'd been fighting for. Not power, not dominance, just the chance to build something that served people instead of using them. That night, alone in chambers that had been renovated to feel less like a fortress and more like a home, Celine found him standing on the balcony overlooking the capital. "You okay?" Kael looked at her, at the woman who'd chosen to stand beside a broken king and help him become something better. "Yeah, I'm good." She moved into his arms, and they stood there watching lights flicker in windows across the city, signs of life returning, of hope rebuilding. "Do you regret it?" Celine's voice was quiet. "Giving up absolute power? Not even a little. Even when the council overrules you? Especially then." Kael's arms tightened around her. "Because it means the system's working, means I'm not a tyrant making choices for everyone. You've changed, had to. The alternative was losing everything that mattered." Celine was quiet for a moment. "I forgive you." The words hit like a physical blow. Kael went still. "What?" "For leaving. For the lies. For all of it." Her voice was steady. "I forgive you. Not because you've earned it. Not because you've suffered enough. But because holding on to that anger was destroying me, and I'm choosing to let it go." Kael felt something break open in his chest, something that had been locked tight for 5 years. "Celine, I love you." She turned in his arms to face him. "Still. Again. Always. And I'm choosing you. Not because you're a king, not because you're powerful, but because you're the man who keeps trying even when it's hard." Kael kissed her then, deep and desperate and full of 5 years of grief, finally finding release. When they broke apart, both were crying, and neither cared. "I don't deserve you." Probably not. Celine smiled through tears. But you're stuck with me anyway. Best thing that ever happened to me. They stood there as the city settled into sleep around them. Two people who'd survived hell and found each other in the aftermath, and Kael realized something fundamental. The greatest victory of his life wasn't reclaiming his throne. It was learning that he didn't need to carry the world alone. That strength came from asking for help. That leadership meant serving instead of commanding. That love was choosing someone every day, even when it was hard, even when it hurt, even when it would be easier to walk away. 5 years ago, he'd been a king who ruled through fear and isolation. Now he was a man learning to lead through partnership and trust. It wasn't perfect. Wasn't easy. There would be more struggles ahead, more failures, more moments where he fell short of the leader he wanted to be. But with Celine beside him, he'd keep trying, keep learning, keep choosing to be better. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The stars burned overhead, indifferent to the small dramas of wolves trying to build kingdoms from broken pieces, and Kael looked up at them with something approaching peace. He'd lost everything once. Walked away from his throne to protect the woman he loved and ended up losing her anyway. But he'd fought his way back, faced his mistakes, earned a second chance through honesty instead of manipulation. And standing here now, with Celine in his arms and a kingdom slowly healing beneath them, Kael Draven understood the truth that had taken 5 years to learn. Real power wasn't about domination. It was about having the courage to be vulnerable, to admit mistakes, to ask for help, to stand beside someone as an equal instead of above them as a ruler. That was the kind of strength that lasted, the kind that built instead of destroyed, the kind that transformed broken kings into decent men. And for the first time in his life, Kael was proud of who he'd become. Not the alpha king of Shadowfang, just Kael, a man trying to be worthy of the woman who'd chosen him, a partner learning to share instead of carry, a leader discovering that serving people mattered more than ruling them. It was enough. It was everything. And as the night deepened and the city dreamed, Kael held Celine close and made a silent promise to the stars. He would never stop trying, never stop learning, never stop choosing her, choosing them, choosing the hard work of building something real instead of the easy comfort of power and isolation. Because some things were worth fighting for. Some people were worth changing for. And love, real love, was worth every sacrifice, every failure, every moment of vulnerability it took to earn it. 5 years ago, he'd lost everything. Tonight, he'd finally found his way home, and that made all the difference.